For this lesson, you'll need a scalpel or a knife and extra blades, cutting boards, preferably in different colors, safety goggles or protective eyewear, an apple, a potato, gloves, lots of them, test tubes, cold water, baking soda, dowels or some kind of stirring rod, disinfectant wipes, and lots of them, hydrogen peroxide, vinegar, an electric kettle, beef liver, or you can use stewed beef, but beef liver is preferred, chicken. In part 1 of this lesson, students will observe the normal reaction of the enzyme catalase. First, students should make sure they have a clean area. And you'll need the test tubes, test tube holders, the cutting boards, beef livers, and you'll need a scalpel. Since students are handling raw meat, it's important to note that they should change their gloves each time they engage with raw meat. So first, you'll want to take 2 milliliters of hydrogen peroxide and put it inside of a test tube. Once you have the 2 milliliters inside of your test tube, you'll want to cut a small piece of liver. And again, after you finish handling the liver, you should change your gloves. I struggled a bit to open it, but no worries, that's why we have a scalpel. So you'll cut a small piece of liver and place it inside of your test tube. Again, changing your gloves to make sure that you are not getting any of the residue anywhere else. Once students change their gloves, they should put a piece of liver inside of the test tube and watch the normal reaction of catalase. Also in part 1, students will ask themselves, is catalase reusable? In order to do this, students will first get a new pair of gloves. Please do not dispose of the liver that you used in the previous part of the lesson. Students will take an empty, clean test tube and empty the peroxide from the test tube that was used to observe catalase into the new test tube. Then they will slice a new piece of liver and empty that, and then determine if catalase is reusable. In part 2 of this lesson, students will identify tissues that contain catalase. To identify tissues that contain catalase, students will need to have 3 test tubes, 1 for an apple, 1 for a potato, and 1 for the raw chicken meat. It's important to note, again, you're changing your gloves consistently. So they will take 2 milliliters of hydrogen peroxide and empty it into each of the test tubes. And make sure you clean up all spills and messes using the disinfectant wipes. And do not consume any of the materials. So now that each one has hydrogen peroxide in it, you will grab some gloves and slice a small piece of the apple, slice a small piece of the potato, and slice a small piece of chicken. Since you are handling raw chicken, I cannot stress it enough. Please, please, please use gloves and change them once you are finished with the raw chicken. Once you have finished cutting each of the different tissues, you will place them inside of your test tube with peroxide and observe the reaction. For the next part of the lesson, students will identify the effects of temperature on catalase. In order to do this, you will need your hot water as well as cold water, and you will need to be able to soak the test tubes in a hot water bath or a cold water bath. So you'll want to cut a small piece of liver and place it inside of a test tube. Change your gloves, and then you'll want to place a little bit of distilled water over top of it, roughly 2 milliliters. You'll want to repeat this process for another test tube, but for this first part, you'll take it and put it in a hot water bath and let it sit for about 5 minutes. Once you have done this, you'll want to take out your test tube and pour off that little bit of water that you placed on top of it. You should see a change in the way the meat looks. Then you'll take about 2 milliliters of hydrogen peroxide and place it on top of the meat and observe the reaction. You'll repeat this again for cold water by cutting a small piece of liver and placing it inside of a test tube. And then again, putting a little bit of distilled water on top of it and then letting it sit for about 5 minutes. Once you've let it sit for 5 minutes, again, you'll repeat the process by putting 2 milliliters of hydrogen peroxide on top of the meat after pouring out the cold water. And then watch for the reaction. For this lesson, students will identify the effect of pH on catalase. And to do this, you will need your liver, baking soda, white vinegar, and distilled water, as well as hydrogen peroxide. So in each of the clean test tubes, you will place 2 milliliters of hydrogen peroxide in each of the test tubes. Then you will add 2 milliliters of baking soda, which will serve as your base or your basic pH, 2 milliliters of vinegar, which will serve as your acidic pH, and 2 milliliters of distilled water, which will serve as a neutral pH. Then you will stir each of the test tubes using different stirring rods. And from there, you can add a small piece of liver to each one, and you get to observe the reaction. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our YouTube channel for more videos like this and others that we know you'll enjoy. To learn more about the STEM lessons and other STEM initiatives, visit www.ncafterschool.org. You can also check us out on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram, and that's at NC After School.